Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be part of this conference after a very informative and engaging day yesterday, and I'm sure today will prove likewise. So this morning, I'm tasked with setting the scene on biodiversity under the theme of climate change. So, as we all know, in 2019, the government declared an emergency on climate change and biodiversity loss. And recently, there have been calls to talk more about global heating and climate breakdown rather than the more tame global warming and climate change. What's wrong with a bit of warmth and change, after all? And I think it's fair to say that on any given day, if you pick up a newspaper or you watch a news item on TV, invariably climate change will feature much more commonly than the subject of biodiversity loss. Indeed, we might well ask, has biodiversity loss been eclipsed by climate change on the international agenda? On the national agenda, and where does it feature on your local authorities' agenda? Why is it that climate change features much more widely in our media than the subject of biodiversity loss? Is it because it serves up much more dramatic imagery for news items, directly affecting people's livelihoods and social circumstances? And it begs the question, are you being affected by biodiversity loss? Have you felt the loss in your own environment, your livelihood, your quality of life? Why aren't we noticing it? Do we need another term to convey the gravity and urgency of the situation? Scientists now talk about the sixth mass extinction, and if that isn't stark or frightening enough, I don't know what is. But this morning, we're looking at the challenges faced by local authorities in these areas and how actions for biodiversity and climate can complement or collide in the delivery of policies required under national and local climate action plans and biodiversity plans. So for the next few slides, I want to refer you to a report that was published by the European Environment Agency last year, and it's very informative in explaining the value of habitats and biodiversity in both carbon storage and carbon sequestration. So for biodiversity and carbon storage, we know that wetland habitats serve as the highest carbon pools in our terrestrial ecosystems. So the relevant unit of measurement here is megagrams per hectare, or in old money, £894 per acre. So for salt marshes, their rate of carbon storage ranges between 225 and 300 megagrams per hectare. Bogs and fens have a high capacity of carbon accumulation in peat, ranging from 150 to 225 megagrams per hectare. And in forests, carbon storage ranges from 75 to 225 megagrams per hectare. Coastal and marine systems hold high ranges of carbon, namely in marl beds, with values higher than 150 megagrams per hectare, as well as seagrass beds and intertidal sediments, storing between 10 to 50 megagrams per hectare of carbon stock. But, and as this report highlights, carbon storage is heavily dependent on local conditions, and no single set of values can accurately represent all cases. So then, looking at biodiversity and carbon sequestration, forests have by far the highest rate of carbon uptake in terrestrial ecosystems, up to about three times those of wetlands and agri-ecosystems. The forest carbon sequestration rate is 3.17 megagrams per hectare per year. Again, local conditions will dictate, but it's in the range of 0.05 to 9.6 megagrams per hectare per year. The values for wetlands in absorbing carbon are lower. Ranges between 0.49 to 6.5 megagrams per hectare per year, but obviously very deep peat bogs can accumulate carbon over hundreds of years. Coastal and marine ecosystems have a high storage capacity of carbon per unit area, comparable and in some cases higher than terrestrial forests, and they're now being recognised for their role in mitigating climate change. Healthy coastal and marine wetlands can hold carbon stock in the range of 50 to 150 megagrams per hectare, and this is what is referred to as blue carbon. And across Europe, salt marshes and seagrass carbon storage represents about 1.5 to 4% of global blue carbon. So in Ireland, we have around 76 large seagrass beds around the Irish coastline, and they play a key role in capturing significant quantities of carbon and sustaining marine habitats. Protecting our seagrass beds can help avoid emissions of about 2.2 million tonnes of CO2. But, and according to a recent Coastwatch survey, our seagrass beds have declined from 18,000 square metres to just over 10,500 square metres since 2019 due to invasive seaweeds, eutrophic algae, heat stress, pollution and trampling. So what does all this mean for us in local authorities? So two key messages. To store carbon, we need to retain and protect peatlands and wetlands, and to sequester carbon, we need to protect woodlands, forests, and plant more trees. So it's useful to reflect on how we're all doing on this. So, for example, in your local authority, have you reviewed enforced planning applications under Class 17 of Schedule 2 of the Planning and Development Regulations? This is in relation to peat extraction. How many planning applications or enforcement cases have been taken in relation to Class 11 of Schedule 2 of the Planning and Development Regulations? This is in relation to land reclamation, where drainage and or reclamation of wetlands greater than 0.1 hectare is not exempt from planning. How many referrals for land reclamation has your local authority received under the EIA agriculture regulations for removal of hedgerows and land reclamation from the Department of Agriculture? How many responses have you issued? Have you carried out an inventory of wetlands in your local authority area, and are they listed for protection in the county development plan? Does your local authority have a tree strategy, active tree planting programme? And if you're a coastal county, what is the conservation condition of salt marshes and seagrass beds where they occur? Are they in an SAC, or will they be protected in a marine protected area? So from European guidance then to national and regional guidance, the Southern and Regional Assembly recently produced a very useful document, Blue-Green Infrastructure and Nature-Based Solution Framework. It's available from the website there, the Southern Regional Assembly. And I particularly like their catalogue of nature-based solutions. So have a quick scan to consider how many, or indeed if any, of these measures you have applied in your city or county. How many of these measures could you see being applied in the future as the challenge to address the climate and biodiversity loss emergency increases? And then bringing it down to the local level, I want to highlight just a few areas where local authorities can take positive actions for climate and biodiversity, but with a caveat that those actions will not always be mutually beneficial, and in many cases the positive gain for climate action may have an impact on biodiversity, and likewise the positive gain for biodiversity may have an impact on greenhouse emissions. So it's a constant shifting balance, and it will depend on the priorities for the particular scheme or project. So these are just 6 sample areas that I've selected for this purpose. Some of these areas have or are attracting significant funding in recent years, and thus offer great potential for designing in climate action and biodiversity measures. But as we all know, when we go to deliver many of these schemes, there will be policy conflicts, and we are faced with the challenge of assessing which priority and impacts outweighs the other, and what is the long-term gain for short-term loss or impact. So, for example, in best practice in urban design and development, we may desire to retain existing watercourses, hedgerows in new housing development sites. But how achievable is this with current housing density guidelines, the housing crisis, and profit margins that are being sought in the current inflationary environment with an ever-increasing cost of construction? Every square metre counts. In coastal areas, Save Our Sand Dunes campaigns may not prove popular with the public, as with more summers like this, we're attracting more visitors to the coast, and invariably people want to walk through or slide down the dunes. How do we effectively convey the message of the need for coastal and habitat protection? The proliferation of walkways, cycleways, greenways and blueways has been exponential in the last 5 years, supported by greatly increased funding. Many of these go along old railway routes or river towpaths, some of which are SACs and lay undisturbed as ecological corridors for the past 100 years. Strategic environmental assessment was never carried out to assess the cumulative impact of loss of habitat from the hundreds of kilometres of hard surface that have been laid on or along these ecological corridors. So while it is promoting active travel, there may be adverse impact on ecological corridors of local biodiversity importance. With regard to trees, as we know, trees are one of the best sequesters of carbon. And I just want to highlight one issue regarding hedge cutting notices which are served by local authorities under the Roads Act. I have noticed, and you probably have too, of wide-scale removal across the country of mature trees, majestic oak, beech and limes, by landowners, mainly due to fear of litigation from falling trees. In one case, a landowner had proposed to remove 100 such trees because he thought the council were requiring it under hedge cutting notices through hearsay of his neighbours, and this wasn't the case at all. The situation isn't helped in that the Forestry Act allows trees to be cut within 10 metres of a public road without a felling licence, leading to the removal of many mature trees, carbon stores, sometimes without need. Then look at the area of lighting. So a lot of local authorities are undertaking retrofitting of public lighting schemes with LED lighting, and community groups often call for flood lighting of heritage buildings. Artificial light at night, Elan, is now recognised as a form of pollution. So public lighting schemes need to consider impacts on bats, for example. So design of lighting specifications should consider location of bat roosts, location of commuting and foraging lines. And we don't have time to give detail on this, but it's a very useful source of guidance from the MPWS, Bat Conservation Ireland and the Vincent Wildlife Trust. But generally, bat surveys may be required in advance of the design and delivery of lighting schemes. And then going back to wetlands, so as well as protecting them, can we be more proactive? Can we restore the ones that we have lost or damaged? Globally, we're losing wetlands 3 times faster than our forests, and 40% of wildlife depends on wetland-type habitats. Across the country, there are many projects under Quilcha, Life, MPWS, involving removal of conifer trees from bogs and blocking of drains, which by their nature will require disturbance of the wetland. And this can lead to drying out and organic carbon oxidation, resulting in the release of CO2 and methane to the atmosphere. So is your biodiversity positive action resulting in a climate negative impact? There is a lot of research and dynamic modelling being carried out in this area, and it is pointed to the fact that while there is undesirable methane emissions in the initial stage of rehabilitation, the long-term effect becomes unimportant compared to carbon sequestration, proving that these habitats become net carbon sinks as carbon sequestration rates are balancing the methane emissions. So, as local authorities are charged with an increasing number of projects, policy and work practices in the climate and biodiversity areas, we may well ask who is going to do all this work. So, a quick look at the resources in these areas. So, for climate, we had the setting up of the 4 CAROs and the rollout of climate change training in 21 and 22. And I think we now have 14 local authorities with climate action officers, it's changing every few months, who are in charge of delivering on climate adaptation strategies and climate action plans. CARO training is focused on a number of themes and has included biodiversity, but there is scope to develop this module further and collate case studies that can be shared across the regions. In the biodiversity area, 5 local authorities have had long-standing biodiversity officers who do great work, and just as the Minister said this morning, we will have 10 new biodiversity officers located around the country by the end of this year, with further rollout in 2023 and 2024. Heritage officers are employed by all local authorities at this stage, and our brief obviously includes advice on natural heritage and delivery of biodiversity projects and awareness. The 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan is in draft, and the Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity Loss was established earlier this summer and review submissions in October and November. But given the importance of biodiversity and climate action, it seems logical to have climate and biodiversity teams and offices in our local authorities. So, what can your local authority do following this conference? Resources, if you don't have them already, appoint a biodiversity officer, a climate action officer, set up a climate and biodiversity team. Training is required, so liaise with the CAROs, the local authority national services training group on possible training opportunities for staff to upskill in biodiversity management and enhancement. Policy, so we're talking a lot about blue-green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, to really get them into development management and local authority projects. Then, while I think all our development plans are really strong on policies for all these areas, and at this stage we are generally process compliant on the EIA screenings and the AA screenings, but our work practices are still very questionable. And I think training and development of ecological clerk of works in local authorities would be really beneficial in this regard. We need to strengthen planning enforcement on the Class 11 and Class 17 unauthorised development, and in coastal SACs and SBAs where we have our zostra beds and salt marsh, which, as we saw earlier, are very important for carbon. And habitat surveying, so if you haven't already, commission a wetland survey in your local authority area, and importantly to make that knowledge available, list the sites for protection in the county development plan. And then moving a step further, and Shirley will talk about this later, identify wetland sites for restoration and enhancement. And the Marine Act came in there recently, so I suppose coastal counties will be looking at marine protected areas, and this could be useful for where you have the large seagrass beds that don't have any current protection. So other features that local authority can do, so land management, so local authorities own various bits of land across their areas, so you should really ramp up the tree planting programme, look at the concept of make room for the river. Fran talked about the various zones along riparian areas yesterday. Consider looking at retention, re-wetting of what used to be called, or what are called the benefiting lands under the Arterial Drainage Act. For coastal protection, look at the use of natural climate buffers as an alternative to the hard engineering. The Eurosites website has very good information in this area. For walking and cycling trails, they will continue and they will require ecological survey. But the ecological survey or proposed schemes should require not only biodiversity protection, but biodiversity gain. Let's get biodiversity gain from these projects. Work practices, review your hedge cutting notice and explain this is not a requirement to cut down mature trees. Lighting schemes incorporate design guidance from MPWS, Back Conservation Ireland, Vincent Wildlife Trust, and in development management, to incorporate more natural heritage features on the sites in new development. As was underlying all this, communication is key. We need to notify the public why we have to exclude areas of the dunes, where we're not mowing the grass until later in the season, why the lights in the Greenway Tunnel won't be on all night for your midnight cycle. So that's really important too. But in summary and conclusion, what all this adds up to is follow the science, identify the opportunities, and we really need to scale up. We really need to be more ambitious, to identify opportunities for replanting, rewetting, and restoring habitats at a large scale. We need to expand on training and resources, and we need to advocate for and enable action in biodiversity policy, biodiversity work programs, and work practices. So there's some useful references there, which you'll have in the presentation, and that's it. Thank you very much.